If you saw my video regarding an old Disney fan theory about Frozen, Tangled, Tarzan, and The Little Mermaid, then you'd remember that I briefly mentioned how the source material for Frozen is vastly different from what we saw in the films. If you didn't see that video yet, I would encourage you to go watch it. I could always use the extra views, and I think it's pretty fun. But as weird as it is, the original story that inspired Frozen is actually pretty interesting, if not a little unintentionally comedic, and so I wanted to share it with you all. As a little refresher, Frozen is a loose adaptation of the fairy tale The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, although it could be argued that it was more of an inspiration, as Frozen has very little similarities with it besides having a queen with ice powers that resides in a magic castle in the mountains. I also mentioned that The Snow Queen has a lot of similarities with some of the Chronicles of Narnia books, and as I dive a little bit deeper into the story, I'll explain what I mean. First, let's do a quick recap on the author Hans Christian Andersen. He was a Danish author famous for a plethora of famous fairy tales, including The Little Mermaid, The Emperor's New Clothes, Thumbelina, The Princess and the Pea, The Ugly Duckling, and of course, The Snow Queen. Now, Mr. Andersen was a very interesting man in his own right, and there's even speculation that he may have actually been the illegitimate son of King Christian VIII. He grew up in relative poverty working as a tailor's apprentice and then as a soprano at the Danish Royal Theatre, until later he worked as a poet and an author. The director of the Royal Theatre actually thought so highly of Andersen that he persuaded King Frederick VI to pay for his education. But unfortunately, Andersen's education years were actually quite miserable for him because of his abusive teachers, and he was regularly discouraged from pursuing a writing career. This caused him to become deeply depressed, and it can be seen in a lot of his writing. Andersen would eventually cross paths with Charles Dickens, and the two would develop a mutual respect for each other's work. They both wrote many stories dealing with poverty, classism, childhood trauma, and the struggles of the industrial age, and so the two authors connected on a lot of levels. Unfortunately, Andersen actually misinterpreted their relationship as more of a friendship than it actually was, and he actually traveled to England just to visit Charles Dickens and his family. However, that stay ended up lasting over a month and ended up frustrating the Dickens family so much that it would cause Charles Dickens to cut ties with Andersen and cease any correspondence with him, even though Andersen himself thought it was a pretty pleasant visit and he had a great time. And this is a very good example of how Andersen had a big struggle with relationship issues. Aside from making friends, he also struggled with romantic partners. Andersen allegedly had an attraction to both men and women, but none of these relationships ever lasted, and he would often bounce back and forth between his obsessions with different people. I'm running out of breath. And he would often bounce back and forth between his obsessions with different people, with several of them even serving as inspirations for characters in his stories. The biggest and perhaps most regular of Andersen's loves was the opera singer Jenny Lind, and his story The Nightingale is actually a sort of expression of love for Jenny, and this actually earned her the nickname of the Swedish Nightingale. Andersen was so in love with Jenny at one point that he attempted to overcome his social awkwardness and actually proposed to Jenny by giving her a love letter at a train station, only to be sent to the Brother in Christ zone. In her own words, that God would bless and protect my brother Hans is the sincerest wish of his affectionate sister Jenny. This guy really couldn't catch a break. Now, despite his struggles with social and romantic relationships, Andersen was a highly revered author and was considered to be a national treasure by the Danish government. He was even paid an annual stipend by the government just for being such a great writer. He would eventually die of liver cancer at the age of 70, and he is buried in the Frederiksberg Cemetery in Copenhagen. So clearly, Hans Christian Andersen had a very tumultuous personal life despite his success and acclaim as an author. As I said a moment ago, he used a lot of his experiences as inspiration for elements in many of his stories. His rejection at the hand of Jenny Lind was actually the experience that led him to write The Snow Queen after the cold-hearted woman that refused his love. So what is The Snow Queen actually about? Well, the story begins, how else, but with the devil creating an enchanted mirror. And already we're off to a good start. The mirror has the power to hide the positive aspects of anything it reflects and amplifies the bad side. The devil disguises himself as a troll and becomes the headmaster of a troll school and begins showing his pupils how to use the mirror to corrupt humanity. The devil then comes up with the brilliant idea to use the mirror to corrupt the angels against each other and take over heaven. Flawless plan, right? So the devil and his minions begin to travel up to heaven, but they are laughing so hard at the idea of this epic prank that they're about to pull that they drop the mirror, which then shatters into dust and scatters across the world and embeds itself into the hearts and eyes of mankind, making them focus on the negative things and the people around them. A number of years pass and we are introduced to Gerda and Kai, two children that are neighbors and have developed a close friendship with one another. They spend their days playing in a window box garden that they share and visit each other's house by crossing between the windows of their interconnected attics. With the arrival of winter, Kai's grandmother tells the children stories about a magical queen with the power to control snowflakes, just like a queen bee controls a hive. And shortly after, Kai actually sees this snow queen through his window during a blizzard. She beckons him to join her, but he is frightened away. As spring comes around, Kai and Gerda's friendship continues to blossom, and they grow a rose bush in their window box garden as a symbol of their love for one another. One beautiful summer day, a gust of wind carrying dust from the Devil's Mirror blows a shard of glass into Kai's eyes, and he is almost instantly corrupted into a bitter and unpleasant shadow of himself. He starts to become rude to his grandmother and cruel to Gerda, even destroying the rose bush that they had grown together. As he further distances himself from his friend and becomes more and more negative, the only beauty Kai now sees in the world is in the snowflakes that he inspects with a magnifying glass. When winter comes around again, Kai goes out to sled in the snow and encounters a mysterious woman in a fur coat riding in a sleigh. She agrees to let Kai ride around behind her sleigh, but he becomes so frightened doing it that he tries to say the Lord's Prayer. However, he is so scared that all he can remember are his multiplication tables. As the snow settles, the woman reveals herself to be the Snow Queen, and she invites Kai into the sled to share the warmth of her fur coat. She uses her magic to entice Kai into becoming her prisoner, and then she rides off with him into the snow. With Kai's disappearance, the town suspects that he is drowned in a nearby river. Gerda, however, is unconvinced, so she sets out to discover what happened to her friend. She goes around asking various people, animals, and even the sunlight itself if anyone has seen Kai, but she has no luck. Gerda is eventually able to speak with the spirit of the river, which confirms that Kai did not drown in it. So Gerda gets a boat and travels down the river to find Kai. She encounters another sorceress who is a sort of antithesis to the Snow Queen, as this woman lives in an enchanted garden of eternal summer. She wants to keep Gerda there forever, so she uses her magic to make Gerda forget about Kai, and then causes all of her roses to sink beneath the earth so they won't remind Gerda of her lost friend. However, the sorceress forgets to hide the rose in her garden hat, and when Gerda eventually sees it, she is brought to tears, which revives the magic roses that had been hidden. The roses explain to Gerda that while they were hidden under the earth, they could see into the realm of the dead, and Kai was not there, so he must still be alive. Realizing she's been deceived, Gerda escapes the Garden of Eternal Summer and finds that it is now late autumn, and with winter soon coming again, she has no warm clothes to wear. She befriends a crow and tells it her story, and the crow explains that the new prince of the land sounds an awful lot like Kai. The princess of the land has been seeking a husband, and men from all over have come to seek her hand. One of the people to come was a young man with long, shabby hair and raggedy clothing. The crow and his crow wife agree to help Gerda sneak into the palace to find the prince, and Gerda finds him sleeping in a bed with his back turned to her. As she lifts the blanket off the prince, Gerda calls out Kai's name. The prince is startled awake and turns to Gerda, but it's not Kai. Surprisingly, this prince and princess are not upset at Gerda, but take pity on her instead. They let her rest at the castle and offer to let her stay there for good, but Gerda is adamant about finding Kai. So the prince and princess equip her with winter clothes and a coach and send her out to continue her quest. Gerda is once again detoured when a group of bandits attacks her coach thinking that she is gold. An old hag with a full beard and bushy eyebrows pulls Gerda out of the coach and notices how well fed she is, and it's here implied that the bandits, or at least the hag, intend to eat her. Thankfully, the hag's daughter, who is an absolute menace, wants to spare Gerda and make her a playmate, so she bites the hag's ear to get her attention and stop her from killing Gerda. The hag is so upset at her daughter that she drops Gerda and flails around trying to get her daughter off of her ear. The rest of the robbers think this whole ordeal is a hoot, so they agree to let Gerda live and become the little girl's friend. The bandits bring her back to their fortress, where the little girl brings Gerda to her corner and hears her story about Kai. She also shows off her flock of pet pigeons and the reindeer that she keeps tied up. Now, this little girl is not as sweet and innocent as she might seem right now, because she's actually a little psychopath. She keeps this reindeer tied up because she gets enjoyment by tickling its neck with a knife and watching its fearful reactions. She also sleeps with this knife every night because, as she says,
"You never know what might happen."
The little girl ends up going to sleep with the knife in one hand and the other hand around Gerda, explaining that she will let Gerda live as long as she's able to entertain and satisfy the bandits. If or when Gerda finally disappoints them, the little girl will kill Gerda herself. Gerda is rightfully frightened and disturbed, too much to even sleep that night. Then 2 of the robber girls' wood pigeons come to Gerda while the bandits are all asleep and reveal that they have seen Kai. They explain that before they were captured by the little girl, they saw Kai and the Snow Queen pass by their nest, and they were the only 2 pigeons to survive after the Snow Queen blew upon the nest and killed the rest. The pigeons say that the Snow Queen was traveling north and most likely went into the Laplands, which are always covered in snow and ice. The Laplands are a subarctic region in the northernmost part of Finland on the border with Sweden, Norway, and Russia, and it's a well-known destination spot for winter activities like skiing or viewing the northern lights, and this would be a perfect place for a woman obsessed with snow and ice to reside. Gerda presses the pigeons for more information, but they tell her that the reindeer might actually know more since he's from the Laplands. The reindeer, whose name is Bay, tells Gerda that the Laplands are just a place where the Snow Queen spends her summers, and that her palace is actually located much further north on the island of Spitsbergen, which is close to the North Pole. Gerda is so emotional about getting one step closer to finding Kai that her outburst wakes up the little robber girl, who then says, "Hey, I'm trying to sleep.
Shut up or I'll kill you."
Gerda relays everything that the pigeons and Bay told her, and the little robber girl actually has a change of heart and agrees to let her leave the fortress. Knowing that the hag will not let her leave, Gerda and the girl put together a plan for her to escape.
Dying over here.
When morning comes, the little girl tackles her mother, yanks on her beard, and says, "Good morning, my sweet nanny goat of a mother." The hag then flies into a rage and beats the little girl, then gets drunk and falls asleep again. The little girl then goes to Bay the reindeer and says, "Look, I'd love to keep teasing you by rubbing this knife across your throat, but I've decided that I care about helping Gerda more, so I'll set you free if you promise to take her to find Kai." Bay, of course, agrees, and so the little girl helps Gerda get up onto him and gives her some provisions for the journey. She then tells Gerda, "You know how you came in here with those really fancy winter clothes? I think I'll keep them, but you can have my ugly hag mother's old gloves, which are so big that they'll go all the way up to your arms anyway." Gerda has no problem with this, and with a final thank you and farewell, she and Bay set off for the Laplands. When they reach the outskirts of the Laplands, Gerda and Bay stop at the house of an old woman. They relay their story to her, and the lady says that they still have about 100 miles to go before reaching the Snow Queen's palace. She offers to give them directions to find a Finnish woman farther north who can guide them on the rest of their journey. But since she is so poor, the lady has no paper, so she writes the directions on a dried fish and gives it to Gerda. After recuperating at the lady's shack, Gerda and Bay set out again. When they reach the Finnish woman's house, they find that she keeps it so warm inside that she walks around with almost no clothes on. It is in fact so warm that Bay has to keep a block of ice on his head to stay cool, and Gerda has to remove the hag gloves. They tell the woman about their quest to find Kai, and when they show her the dried fish with the directions, the Finnish woman reads them and then says, "You know what? This fish might come in handy as a snack later," and so she puts it in her pantry after memorizing the instructions written on it. Bay realizes that this woman is some sort of magician, and so he asks her to make a potion for Gerda that will make her as strong as a dozen men so that she can defeat the Snow Queen. The woman doubts that this will do any good, but she consults a large leather scroll with strange writings on it, and she reads it so intensely that she begins to sweat, and then she pulls Bay aside to talk to him, and she explains to Bay that she cannot give Gerda any power greater than what she already has. She recognizes that Gerda has some unique gift that has aided her on her quest, and that's why, despite all the obstacles Gerda has encountered, fate seems to be on her side. It's why so many people have seemed almost obligated to help her, and why she's been able to get help from all these animals and flowers and river spirits. With time running short, the woman tells Gerda and Bay that they must hurry to the Snow Queen's castle, which is only 2 miles north. She tells Bay that he can only carry Gerda as far as a bush outside the castle, but must return and let Gerda face the Snow Queen on her own. Gerda and Bay leave in such a hurry that Gerda actually forgets to put on her boots and gloves, and when they reach the Snow Queen's castle, she's forced to enter its icy halls barefoot as Bay has to return to the Finnish woman's house. So upon entering the castle, Gerda is surrounded by a blast of snow that then materializes into the Snow Queen's army of ice monsters. In fear, Gerda utters the Lord's Prayer, which summons a legion of angels that come to her aid and fight off the Snow Queen's soldiers. And while that sounds pretty close to being a sort of Deus Ex Machina, a little girl summoning an army of angels to swoop in and slay ice monsters is still pretty darn cool. So the angels pick up Gerda so that she doesn't have to walk barefoot in the cold, and they carry her through the castle, which turns out to be absolutely massive. As the angels take Gerda deeper into the castle, she sees various halls and rooms numbering in the hundreds, with some seemingly going on for miles. She notices that the entire castle is empty, and places that would be perfect for polar bears to have a ball or foxes to have a tea party are simply devoid of life. Gerda eventually reaches the center of the castle, where she finds a frozen lake called the Mirror of Reason, and on the surface of the lake lies the boy who had once been her friend Kai, but he is now only a cold and nearly lifeless husk. The Snow Queen is nowhere to be found, however, as she has left the castle to travel to Italy so that she can cover the volcanoes Vesuvius and Etna in snow, and has left Kai in isolation. Kai has been compelled by the Snow Queen to be stuck there in constant effort to solve a puzzle that he doesn't know the answer to. Using various shards of ice, he must try to assemble the letters of a magic word that will set him free, but the Snow Queen has made it so that he will never be able to figure out what that word actually is. Gerda rushes over to Kai, but he doesn't really seem to notice or care that she has come to save him. Gerda embraces her friend and begins weeping for him, and her tears seep into his chest and thaw his frozen heart. Kai then snaps out of the spell and sees Gerda, then begins to cry as well, finally flushing the mirror shard from his eye. The two rejoice at being reunited, and as they begin to dance on the frozen pond, they inadvertently cause the shards of ice to move around and perfectly assemble to form the word eternity, which is of course the secret word that Kai was trying to spell. Finally free from the Snow Queen's enchantment, Kai and Gerda flee the castle to find Bay and another reindeer waiting for them at the bush to take them back to the Finnish woman, who gives them instructions on how to get home. They continue on to the woman in the Laplands, who gives them new clothes for the rest of the journey, and then Kai and Gerda exit the north just as spring begins. They soon encounter a young woman with a red hat and pistols riding on a beautiful horse. Gerda actually recognizes the horse as one from the coach given to her by the prince and princess, and then she realizes that the woman riding it is the little robber girl. She had grown tired of living with the bandits and decided to set out and make a life for herself. She tells Gerda that so much time has passed since she was last here that the prince and princess have gone away and the crow that helped her has died. The three wish each other well and then go their separate ways, with Kai and Gerda finally reaching their village and returning home. They find that although everything at home seems to have stayed unchanged, they are the ones who feel different and have even become a little bit older. They are rejoined with Kai's grandmother, who closes out the story by reading Matthew 18:3, which says that unless you become as little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Or put in different words, unless you have faith like a child, you will never see eternity. Kai and Gerda sit hand in hand as they welcome the arrival of a glorious summer, both grown-ups but still children at heart, and they reflect on an old hymn that says, "The rose in the valley is blooming so sweet, and angels descend there the children to greet." So in the end, despite all the trials that hindered Gerda and the magic that separated her and Kai, the key to making everything right was the power of love all along, because love conquers all. Now, where have I heard that before? So obviously that story is vastly different from the one told in Frozen, but if you pay attention, you can see how some of the concepts in the original tale translated into elements of the Disney film, and we can also see how a couple other stories have taken beats from the Snow Queen as well. Now, if you're familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, you might have noticed a lot of things that line up with the Snow Queen. C.S. Lewis was among many authors who borrowed or adapted elements from Andersen's tales, and the Narnia stories are a perfect example of that. It's often been said that there is no such thing as an original idea and only original ways to use the same idea, and I thought this was an excellent representation of that. And also, I just really love the Narnia books and love an opportunity to talk about them. But aside from the obvious example of Jadis the White Witch, C.S. Lewis uses several other things from the Snow Queen, such as a young boy and girl who befriend each other while playing in a garden and then explore interconnected attics in their houses. This is how the story of the magician's nephew begins before whisking the characters off on their own magical adventure. But the Narnia story that takes most from the Snow Queen is obviously The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and there are several examples. A large chunk of the story concerns Edmund, who is a young bratty boy that encounters a mysterious woman who turns out to be a queen with magical ice powers that deceives him into following her only to abduct him and take him away to a creepy ice castle. Sounds familiar, right? And a good chunk of the story is concerned with the Pevensies exploring this magical world and getting help from the people they encounter on their journey to rescue and redeem Edmund. The chief protagonist of the story is debatably Lucy, who is a young girl with a unique boldness and courage that jumps into this new magical world and encounters talking animals and mystical beings that help her along the way. And after finally redeeming himself and escaping from the White Witch, Edmund and Lucy restore their relationship better than it was before. Another thing that Narnia does similar to the Snow Queen is how it deals with the passage of time. The Snow Queen is a little bit more vague, but both tales show time passing differently during the magical adventure than back home in the real world. Narnia does this by showing that no time actually passes in our world, while the characters might spend days, months, and even years adventuring in Narnia, and in the Snow Queen, it seems to show Kai and Gerda returning to their hometown to find that no time has passed, even though they are observably much older. In regards to Frozen, the similarities are much less obvious, to the point where you couldn't really even say it's an adaptation of the Snow Queen, and is, like I said, more just vaguely inspired. Some things that are retained are Elsa being able to create sentient life out of snow, or the inclusion of trolls in the story, although the ones in Frozen aren't secretly demons, as far as we know. The story was originally intended to be much more faithful to Andersen's tale in earlier drafts, but for one reason or another it deviated and became the story we know today. The close friendship between Gerda and Kai is swapped out with the strained relationship between Anna and Elsa, and instead of the Snow Queen being an evil enchantress with incredible mastery over her powers, Elsa is still trying to figure out who she is and what her powers can do. Gerda goes on a quest to save her friend from the Snow Queen, and Anna goes on a quest to save her sister from herself. There's no talking reindeer that help along the quest, but Sven is still a significant part of Anna's journey to reach Elsa's ice castle. There's also no semi-naked Finnish woman with an overly warm house that helps guide the heroes, but there is a flamboyant Scandinavian man with an affinity for heat and humidity. The gruff and violent robber girl is swapped out for the much more agreeable Kristoff, but they still serve the similar purpose of helping the main character on her journey. And instead of Kai getting his heart frozen by the Snow Queen and later revived by the hero Gerda, Elsa is the one who thaws Anna's heart after freezing it herself. Another difference is that while Kai is apparently numb to his condition, Anna is noticeably cold and wasting away, but in both versions, only an act of love can thaw a frozen heart. There's probably a lot more story elements that I missed, so if anyone wants to point them out, feel free to drop it in the comments. And that's really all I've got left. I found the story of the Snow Queen pretty interesting for an old children's fable, and I think it's really neat to see how the works of Hans Christian Andersen still have a pretty significant impact after hundreds of years. I also think that it's really neat that you were here to join me on this journey of exploration. Thank you so much for watching, please come back for more, and if you've got a storm raging on inside, my advice would be to just let it go. Goodbye, everybody.